Welcome to Dr. Joe Unplugged. This podcast contains general information and is not in any way medical advice. Are we over-medicating our children and over-medicalising their life? Good question. Everybody's got an opinion, including me. I'd like to start with a quote, and this is from The Spectator, and the link will be down below. Writing in Pulse, a British GP, Dr. David Turner, commented, and in quote, "What I struggle with is the medicalisation of the normal range of neurodiversity. There is no precedent in the natural world where groups of young adolescents are forced to sit still for several hours a day learning abstract concepts such as maths and English. The fact that most kids do is amazing. Yet we feel that those who struggle to pay attention to the teacher for a required number of hours are in some way abnormal and must be diagnosed with a mental illness and treated with amphetamines." End quote. The concentration span of a goldfish is often used as an example of not much concentration. Apparently, the goldfish has a concentration span of 9 seconds. How this is worked out is beyond me, but I did read that in a book recently. And that the human concentration span has shrunk from 12 seconds to 8 seconds, partly over the last 20 years in response to smartphones, which we all do, and look, I'm guilty as well, tends to check somewhat more periodically than we should. When I was at school, literally in the last century, we did not have smartphones. In fact, we weren't even allowed to use calculators. My year, I think, was the last year where you weren't allowed to take a calculator into the exam room, and the rest, as they say, is history. Computers obviously weren't a thing. Back in the 1990s, I held some positions in medical associations, and even at that point, we were getting letters and complaints from parents about doctors being too ready to diagnose ADHD. Now, before some of you out there all scream, yes, it is a phenomena, and yes, some children do need treatment. But when you look at how it's diagnosed, the criteria, as they always do, have changed, and it's much, much easier to diagnose now in terms of the criteria than previously. You need symptoms for a couple of weeks. You know, things like reaching for toys, not necessarily wanting to sit still for more than 5 minutes. You know, some of the criteria are really, you could diagnose just about anybody in the planet if you tried. And then the next question does become, is it the case that all children learn in the same way? So Kenneth Robinson has a great video on YouTube. It's an animated one looking at education and talking about different forms of intelligence. What's called verbal IQ intelligence is what is taught in schools. You learn stuff, you memorise it, and then you regurgitate it in an exam. That's very useful. You know, if you want to become a mathematician or a doctor or a lawyer, the ability to memorise facts and learn concepts is really important. If you're going to become a musician or an artist or a writer, then yes, you do need to learn to read and write and do arithmetic, don't get me wrong. However, your ability to just remember facts probably really doesn't matter. You have got a more creative bent, and you might be the child in school who is daydreaming and getting bored when you're taught various facts that really don't interest you. There is also practical learning. If you're going to be a carpenter or an electrician, again, you need some basics in terms of your education, but your skills may well be more with your hands and practical, same if you're a mechanic. So once again, if you're forced to sit in a classroom for hours on end, you may get bored, and if you get bored, you may well start to daydream, or you might even misbehave. It is also the case, and this has been shown from work in America, that by having some form of exercise or physical activity first up, so the first period of the day, gets boys in particular, and they are more likely to be diagnosed with ADHD, there are lower rates because they've used up and expended some energy early in the day. Again, these very, very simple changes. And work done in Perth by Martin Whiteley, who's a researcher in this area, has found that, and maybe not surprisingly, the youngest children in the class are more likely to be diagnosed. And when you think that in a year one class, you've got 5-year-olds through to 6-year-olds, those that are 6 have been on the planet 20% longer than the 5-year-olds. They're not all at the same stage of development. But, you know, sensible reasons, there's not possibly no other way, that we do bracket them into what part of the year and what year you were born in. Certainly in Australia, the amount of money that's being spent on education doesn't seem to be getting a good return. Finland seemed to do a lot better. But where are we going with all of this? And this particular article by Rod Liddell in the Spectator, which quoted Dr. David Turner, is talking about smartphones and how they are distracting, and how the more time children, and I suppose adults as well, but we're talking about mainly children here, spend on their smartphones, the more distracted they are, the less their attention span. And there's some attribution of the decrease in attention span for human beings to use of smartphones. Can we ban them? No. The genie is well and truly out of the bottle. Can we control them? Yes. Can we make it that children should not be allowed to have their phones in the classroom during school? Yeah, I think that's a very, very sensible idea. They don't need them. Might they need their iPads or laptops to be doing schoolwork? Look, I think in 2024 and going further on, they probably will. They're replacing exercise books. At some point, exercise books will probably cease to exist. But they don't need to be on their phone playing games, on social media. Now, some of this is for parental control, and it is certainly my view that social media should not be for children under the age of 13. There may be some exceptions. It's got to be age-specific. Maybe some 15-year-olds can't handle it. So that's for parental discretion. But when it comes to the classroom, where they are there to learn, let's keep the phones out of the classroom. And let's also start to think about how we can better cater to the different needs of children in terms of their different learning styles, their different talents, their different strengths. It's amazing how many billionaires were school dropouts. And again, often they were inventors or people with new or creative ideas, because guess what? Creative ideas, you don't learn them, you create them. So, can we be more supporting of these children rather than perhaps looking to give them a medical diagnosis and medication? Thanks for listening to Dr. Joe Unplugged. If you enjoyed this podcast, please subscribe, like and share. You can also follow it on all the socials. There'll be new content uploaded each week.